Hello friends, welcome back to my channel, myself Chirag. In this video, I am going to discuss about HTTP, topic of computer network. Let us check the outline of this video. The first is introduction of HTTP. Next is HTTP transaction, in which I have covered HTTP simple request and HTTP full request. Then next is HTTP header format. Next, HTTP connection, in which I have covered non-persistent HTTP and persistent HTTP. And the last one is difference between the persistent and non-persistent HTTP. Before starting our video, let us subscribe my channel on YouTube, Chirag Bhalodia, follow my blog EDU Resources, and follow me on Instagram and FB. So all the videos material are available on my blog EDU Resources. All the links are given in the description. Let us start with the introduction of HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It is Simple Web Transfer Protocol. It means whenever you want to access any file on the web, at that time you must use HTTP protocol. Next, HTTP protocol use port number 80. It means all the traffic related to HTTP are forward and received at the port number 80. Next, purpose of HTTP to transfer the hypermedia document like HTML. Also we can say using the HTTP we can transfer the multimedia documents. Working of HTTP is based on request response behavior. Let us take one example to understand the request response behavior. There is one client and there is one server. Client want to access a file from the server. So first of all, client make a request to the server for the particular information or file. So after that, server read the request and send requested file to the client. It is called response. So this is known as request response behavior. Next, HTTP transaction or working of HTTP. HTTP transaction have following components. First component is connection. The client makes a connection to the server. We all know that working of HTTP is based on the request response behavior. So before requesting a file from the client side, connection is required. So first component is connection. Next, request. The client requests the information from the server, because working of HTTP is based on the request response behavior. Next, response. Client send a request to the server. After that request, server will provide the information to the client using the response. Sometimes server will refuse to provide the information. Next, close. Whenever client receive the information as per his requirement, after that both the parties terminate the connection. It is called close the connection. Now all the components are discussed one by one in detail. So first component is connection. We all know that connection is the first part of the HTTP transaction. So whenever client want to send a request to the server, at that time connection is established. So it means the translation of the name address into IP address is done by the DNS. For example, client send a request to the server using the URL. The URL is http www.facebook.com. So this URL request is sent to the DNS. DNS will check its directory and find the IP address associated with the facebook.com and send to the client. For example, the facebook.com IP is 192.168.1.1. So here 80 is the port number because HTTP protocol is used. So this IP address sent to the server and make a request for the connection. The client program connects to the server by a TCP connection at the address specified in the URL. So here address is 192.168.1.1. It is the address of facebook.com and 80 is the port number. So here connection is established between the client and server. Next component is request. So here client send a request to the server. So now see this diagram. This is the format of request message. There are four parts in the request message format. The first one is request line, the second one is header field, the third one is blank line, and the fourth one is message body. So here we are discussing HTTP request. So I have discussed request line from this format of request message. Before discuss about the request line, I want to share some information with you. There are two different types of request in HTTP. The first one is simple request and then second one is full request. So before discuss about the request line, we will understand what is simple request and what is full request. So first of all, what is simple request? A simple request is just a single GET line. Here GET is the method of HTTP request and the page desired, it means the URL of the page and without the protocol version. so no protocol version is mentioned in the simple request. So here, example of HTTP simple request. The first element is GET. GET means the HTTP request type. The next element is hypertext. So it is a HTTP protocol without version. And the next is the project.html. It means it is the address of web page, or we can say the page is requested by the client. Next, the response is just the raw page with no header, no MIME and no encoding. In previous slide, we have saw HTTP message request format. In that format, header is there. So whenever HTTP simple request is sent from client to server, at that time there is no header. Next, what is HTTP full request? HTTP full requests are indicated by the presence of the protocol version on the GET request line. Now see the example of HTTP full request. So based on the definition of HTTP full request, the protocol version is included inside the GET request line. Here protocol version is 1.1. Next, the first word on the full request line is simply the name of method. Now see over here, it is the GET to be executed on the web page. So in this example, the first part is GET. So it is the HTTP request type. Also, the full request contain the page desired and the protocol version. Now see in this example, home.html, it is the address of web page, and HTTP 1.1, it is the version of HTTP protocol. So here, the difference between the simple request and full request is that the HTTP version is not available in the simple request and HTTP version is available in the full request. Here HTTP request type GET is case sensitive, so it will be written only in capital letters. Next, request line. Request line is the first field of the format of request message. Request line contains the following things. The first one is the request type, the second one is resources, and the third one is HTTP version. So let us take one example to understand the request line. So this is the example. The first one is the GET, it is the HTTP request type. So this is the first component. The second one is resource. Now it is the home.html, so we can say it is the URL or resource. And the last component is HTTP version. It is mentioned over here. So it is the HTTP version 1.1. So we can say this is the example of HTTP full request. So whenever you mention the HTTP version in the request line, it indicates the full request of HTTP. So now discuss all the components one by one. The first component is request type. So in request type, it categorizes the request message into several methods for HTTP version 1.1. So the methods like that get, post, delete, put, copy, move, link or unlink. So there are number of methods are available in the full request type. In simple request, there are get, post and head method are used. The next component is resource. Here resource means the URL. So URL is used to access the information from the internet. So let us take one example to understand the URL. So this is the example of URL http www.facebook.com/home.html. So now discuss the component of URL. The first component is HTTP. So it is the protocol. The next is www. It is the subdomain. Next one is Facebook. It is the domain name. And the next is .com. So it is the top level domain. And the last one is home.html. It is the file path. So here home.html file is located in the facebook.com server. But whenever client send a request using the URL, but server cannot read the URL because server just read the IP address. So before sending the URL request to the server, it is convert into the IP address. So here www.facebook.com IP address is, for example, 192.168.1.1. Here 80 is the port number because HTTP protocol is the used, and the file home.html. Next, the URL defines the four things. The first one is the method, here HTTP. The second one is the host, so this is the host IP address, and the third one is the port. Port number 80 is used because HTTP protocol, and the fourth one is the path of the file, so it is home.html. So now we can define the URL in these four parts. The first one is protocol, then host IP address, then the port number of the protocol, and the path of the file. Next component is HTTP version. Here in this example, HTTP version 1.1 is used because of the full request of HTTP. If it is simple request, then version is not present. Now we discuss the real-time example of HTTP request message. Now see the real-time example of HTTP request message. So now compare this request message with the request message format. So here first line is the request line as per the request message format. Now see, in request line the first method is the get method is used, then index.html, it is the URL, and the HTTP 1.1 version is used. So this is the example of HTTP request message. So first line is the request line. So after the request line, the next field is the header field, so that all the lines are covered in the header fields. Now see in this format of request message, after the request line, the next field is the header field, and the next one is the blank line. So it is the end of header field. So here message body is not included in this request message. So after the header field, there is the blank line. It is the end of the header field. Next component is response. So we all know that response message is sent from server to client. So here this figure shows the format of response message. There is the minor difference between the format of request message and the format of response message. In request message format, the first field is request line. In response message format, the first field is the status line. The remaining three fields are the same as the request message format. So here in this topic, I have discussed only first field status line of the format of response message. So let us take one example to understand the status line. So here it is the example HTTP 1.1 200 OK. Here HTTP 1.1 is the version of HTTP, 200 is the status code, and OK is the status phrase. So whenever response message is sent from the server to client, at that time status line shows the HTTP 1.1 200 OK. It means the request is succeeded. Let us see the difference status code and the status phrase. The first one is 200 OK. It means the request is succeeded. The next status code is 301. If here 301 is written instead of 200, it means the requested object is moved. Next status code is 400. It means the bad request. So request message not understood by the server. Next status code is 404 not found. It means the requested documents are not found on this server. Next code is 505. It means HTTP version is not supported to the server. So this is the few example of the status code and status phrase. So many times we are facing this kind of error on the internet. So this is not the error. So this is the status code and status phrase of the response message. So now discuss the real-time example of the response message. So here this is the one example of the real-time response message. Now compare this message to the format of response message. The first line shows the status line. It means the HTTP version 1.1, 200, it is the status code, and this is the OK, it is the status phrase. So first line shows the status line of the HTTP response message. From second line onwards, it shows the header lines. So it indicates the header field. And the last one is the HTML file. So it is called the message body. The next component is close. So after request response and all the required information are received to the client side, then both the parties terminate the connection or close the connection. So after the client and server have exchanged the information by sending request and responses, both parties may end the transaction by closing the connection. So here close the connection using the terminating TCP connection method. Next, HTTP header. Before discuss about HTTP header, we will discuss first the difference between the request message format and the response message format. So there is the only one difference between the request message and response message. It is the first field. In request message format, the first field is request line. In response message format, the first field is status line. And the remaining three fields, header field, blank line, and message body, are same in the request message format and response message format. Here I have discussed header field associated with the response message format. So in response message format, first line is status line. So here in status line example, HTTP 1.1 200 OK. It means client request is succeeded at the server side. Next, four different headers are used. The first one is general header. The second one is response header. Response header is present in the response message. Third header is entity header. And fourth header is request header. So request header is present in the request message. So we can say general header and entity header are present in request message as well as in response message. And request header is present in request message and response header is present in response message. So this diagram shows the format of response message because response header is present in this diagram. Next, header can be contain one or more header lines. So here I discussed these three header: general header, response header and entity header. In general header there are two different lines. The first one is shows the date, it means when response was created. The second line indicates the connection of TCP, it is closed. Response header is consist of two lines. The first line is server, it means the response message is generated from which server. So here, so in this diagram it is generated from the Apache server. Second line of response header indicate in which unit the server will accept the data. It will be in bytes. Entity header contains three lines. First line indicates the content type, it is the text HTML content. The second line indicates the length of content, it means the 200 bytes. And the third line indicates in the entity header is last modified. It means when this response message was modified. In response message format, after the header field, next field is blank line. Blank line indicates the header format is over. And the last field of the response message format is message body. Message body contains the different HTML tags like head, title and the body of message. Now discuss about real-time example of HTTP header. So here right hand side it is the format of response message. So we will compare this message with the format of response message. In format of response message, first field is status line. So now this is the status line. It shows the status code and status phrase of the protocol. And from the second line, it shows the header lines. So from the second line onwards, it shows the header of response message. After header line, it shows the blank line. So here /r and /n is the carries written and start the new line. So blank line indicates the header field is over. And the last field of the response message is message body. Now see, this is the data. It means the requested HTML file. So we all know that this response message is sent by the server to the client. Now discuss some of the header field in real-time example. The first field is date. So it indicates the time and date when HTTP response was created and sent by the server. The next field is server. It indicates the message was generated by an Apache web server. Next, last modified. It indicates the time and date when the object was created and the last modified. The next field is content length. It indicates the number of bytes in the object being sent. So it means it's indicate the size of object. The next is content type. It indicates which type of content are present in the message body. So here message body is consist of HTML text. So if you have any query regarding HTTP header, you can ask me in comment section. Next, HTTP connection. There are two types of HTTP connection. The first one is non-persistent HTTP and the second one is persistent HTTP. So before discuss about the types of HTTP connection, I have discussed two different terms. The first one is RTT. RTT stands for round trip time. RTT means a time for a small packets to travel from client to server and server to client. Now what is RTT? Let us discuss in diagram. So here there is one client and there is one server. So as per the definition of RTT, small packet transfer between client to server and server to client. It is called RTT. Next term is HTTP response time. So how can we calculate HTTP response time? To calculate HTTP response time, we have to need one RTT to initiate the TCP connection. Now see in this diagram, there is one RTT to initiate the TCP connection. So here TCP connection is initiated by the client and accepted by the server. The next thing is required one RTT for HTTP request and response. Let us see in the diagram. Client send a HTTP request to the server. Server will send a response to the client. So there is one RTT for HTTP request and response. And the last parameter is file transmission time. So based on this three parameter, the HTTP response time is equal to number of RTT plus file transmit time. So now discussed non-persistent HTTP. Non-persistent HTTP default mode is HTTP 1.0. So let us take one example to understand the working of non-persistent HTTP. So here there is one client and there is one server. So first of all, client send a TCP connection request to the server. Server will accept the request, so it uses one RTT. Then client send a file request to the server. Server will send a response, so it uses another RTT. So there are two RTTs used, and here TCP connection is closed. So it means in non-persistent HTTP connection, after every request response, the TCP connection is closed. So it means the connection is used exactly for one request and one response. So there is one object which is in received file, and client want to access that object from the server. So how can client access that object from the server? So first of all, client initiate the TCP connection request to the server. Server will accept the TCP connection, and then client send object 1 request and received from the server. After receiving that object from the server, again TCP connection is closed. So it means for downloading multiple objects from the server, it requires multiple TCP connection. So now see in this diagram, multiple objects are requested using the multiple TCP connections. So now response time of the non-persistent HTTP is 2 RTT plus 1 file transmit time. So now see in this diagram, there are 2 RTT is used and 1 file transmit time is used for the single file request and response. Let us take one example to better understand the non-persistent HTTP. For example, transferring a web page from server to client. Web page consists of a base of HTML file and 10 JPEG images. So it means total 11 objects are reside on the server. So now the non-persistent HTTP response time is 11 object is equal to 22 RTT plus 11 file transmit time. So based on this equation. So here we can say non-persistent HTTP connection is wasting of time and wasting of resources of server. Next, persistent HTTP. Persistent HTTP default mode is version 1.1 of HTTP. Let us see in this diagram. Initiate the TCP connection request by the client. Server will accept the TCP connection. There is one RTT is used. Then client send a request file to the server. Server will respond that file. So file is received at the client side. Now there is no requested file. After that TCP connection is closed. In persistent HTTP connection, we can say in a single TCP connection, we can access the multiple files from the server. So what I have discussed here is everything written over here. Next, types of persistent connection. The first type is without pipelining persistent HTTP, and the second one is with pipelining persistent HTTP. So let us discuss without pipelining persistent HTTP. So let us take one example to understand the working of without pipelining persistent HTTP. So here there is one client and there is one server. So first of all, client send a TCP request to the server. Server will accept the TCP request from the client. So it uses one RTT. Then client send a file request to the server. Server send a file with a response message. It uses another RTT. For example, in that received file there are two objects. So client want to access those two objects from the server. So first of all, client send object 1 request. Server will respond with the object 1, and object 1 is received at the client side. It uses one RTT. Now client send object 2 request to the server. Server send object 2 and object 2 is received at the client side. It uses one RTT. So now TCP connection is remain open for some time. So there is no request from the client side. After that the TCP connection is closed. So as per the discussion of persistent HTTP, we can say there are multiple files are accessed from the server in a single TCP connection. So what I have explained in this diagram is written over here. So problem in the without pipelining persistent HTTP is the idle situation wastes the server resources. So it means before closing the TCP connection, all the objects are received at the client side. But there is no request from the client side to the server. So TCP connection remains open. So it wastes the server resources. Next, with pipelining persistent HTTP. So default mode of HTTP 1.1 uses the persistent connection with pipelining. So there are two different types in persistent HTTP. One is without pipelining and the second one is with pipelining. When HTTP version 1.1 is used, it means persistent HTTP with pipelining mode is used. So it is the default mode. Let us take one example to understand the working of persistent HTTP with pipelining. Here in this diagram, there is one client and there is one server. So first of all, client send a TCP connection request to the server. Server will accept that TCP connection. It uses 1 RTT. So after establishment of TCP connection, client will send a request to the server. Server will respond with the requested file. So it uses another RTT. So there are multiple objects in that received file. So client want to access that multiple objects from the server. So how client send a request and receive the objects? For example, there are 3 objects in that received file. So here client send a back-to-back request of the object. Now see in this diagram, object 1, object 2 and object 3 are requested from the client. So client will receive all the objects in a sequential manner, object 1, object 2 and object 3, because here pipelining concept is used. So based on that pipeline process, we can say the object 1 is requested, then object 1 is received first, then object 2 is requested and object 2 is received second one, and then object 3 is requested and finally object 3 is received. So it is called persistent HTTP with pipelining. If all the objects are received, then fraction of time the TCP connection is closed. So this is the concept of persistent HTTP with pipelining. So as per discussion of persistent HTTP, there are multiple files are accessed from the server on a single TCP connection. So what I have explained in this diagram is written over here. So problem of without pipelining is solved over here. So pipeline TCP connection remains idle for a smaller fraction of time. So it means all the objects are received at the client side. Within a smaller fraction of time, TCP connection is closed. So if you have any query regarding persistent and non-persistent HTTP, you can ask me in comment section. Next, difference between persistent and non-persistent HTTP. Now discuss about persistent and non-persistent HTTP difference based on some parameters. The first parameter is HTTP version. In persistent HTTP it is 1.1 and in non-persistent HTTP it is 1.0. Next parameter is mode. Persistent HTTP is the default mode and non-persistent is not a default mode. Next parameter is number of RTT used. In persistent HTTP only 1 RTT is used for each object, and in non-persistent HTTP 2 RTT used for each object. Let us see the diagram to better understand the number of RTT used in persistent and non-persistent HTTP. The first diagram is the persistent HTTP and the second diagram is non-persistent HTTP. In persistent HTTP, object 1 is requested and object 1 is received. So there is only 1 RTT is used. So in non-persistent HTTP diagram, before object is requested, initiate the TCP connection. So 1 RTT is used for the TCP connection establishment, and then second RTT is used for the object request and receive. So in persistent HTTP, there is only 1 RTT used for the one object. And in non-persistent HTTP, there are 2 RTT used for the one object. Next parameter is TCP connection. In persistent HTTP, TCP connection is not closed. So it means TCP connection is open until all the requested files are received. In non-persistent HTTP, TCP connection is closed after every request response. Let us see the diagram to understand the TCP connection. Now see in the persistent HTTP diagram, TCP connection is initiated and then all the requested files are received at the client side. Then close the TCP connection. So now in non-persistent HTTP diagram, close the TCP connection after every request and response. Next parameter is number of requests on TCP connection. In persistent HTTP, multiple requests over the single TCP connection. In non-persistent HTTP, multiple requests over the multiple TCP connection. So let us see the diagram to understand the number of requests on TCP connection. So in persistent HTTP diagram, there is a single TCP connection and all the requested files are received. So it means multiple files are requested using the single TCP connection in persistent HTTP. So in non-persistent HTTP, you want to access multiple files from the server, you need to make a multiple TCP connection. Next parameter is request method. In persistent HTTP, it uses
get, head, post, put, delete, and many more methods. In non-persistent HTTP, it uses only get, post, and head method. So this is the difference between persistent HTTP and non-persistent HTTP. You have any query regarding the HTTP, you can ask me in comment section. If you like this video, please hit the like button and share with others. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe me on YouTube, Chirag Bhalodia. Follow my blog Edu Resources and follow me on Instagram and FB. All the links are given in description and the video materials are available on my blog Edu Resources.